This episode is brought to you in partnership with Econet Wireless Zimbabwe. Hello there, Tando Book Club lovers. This season, we're going on a deep dive with some of Africa's female thought leaders. Joining me today as our guest for a 3-episode special is Thembe Khumalo. Thembe Khumalo is a Zimbabwean-born storyteller. She was first published as a columnist in Newsday, which at the time was the country's largest independent newspaper, and her column was called Local Drummer. She went on to write Southern Sister, another weekly column for the Southern Eye. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she released a collection of meditations as an e-booklet called Words for Work. She is currently working on her first novel, and Words and Other Weapons is her first compilation in print. A brand strategist and personal branding coach, Thembe has over the years produced large volumes of content on the subjects of corporate communication, personal branding, and brand strategy, including hosting a Pan-African podcast called Brand to Build on behalf of her consulting firm, Brand Builder Africa. Born at Mchabezi Mission in rural Matabeleland, Thembe is a mother of 2 almost adult daughters. She attended the Dominican convent in Bulawayo and now lives in Harare with her husband. She holds a BA in Media Studies and an MBA from Africa Leadership University. You can find out more about Thembe on her website at www.thembekhumalo.com or follow her on social media at her handle @Thembe Khumalo. As is our custom, we always begin every episode with a quote from a famous African that we believe captures the spirit and message of our book discussion. Naturally, we've chosen a quote from Thembe's book, Words and Other Weapons. And the quote goes, "I mean, sometimes I'm just minding my own business and the water will come. I mean, sometimes. I wonder if the lump is made of water, salt water, like the water in my eyes, I mean. Because the lump, I mean. I think it's choking me. I think the oxygen is going now. I think I want to die. Because the lump." And that's taken from her story, The Lump. Welcome back, Thembe. It is the final episode, and we are very happy to have you back again.
I am loving it here.
You look gorgeous. Love the orange.
Thank
You look
you.
bright and festive.
Thank you, Selena. Orange is my favorite color.
I think a lot of people did not know that until you said that.
Well, there you go.
So we're having a
Fun
really
facts.
special. Okay. So a huge thread and theme in the book is mental well-being, the woman and her whole mind, and probably the struggle to come to the place of a whole mind. And it comes through in all shapes and forms, particularly depression, but the many faces of depression. We see many other mental health issues, from situational depression, chemical imbalance depression, trauma, anxiety, and grief. Why was this so subject for you to explore and give African faces and names to?
A lot of the writing that I do starts out as journal entries. So it is part of how I am processing the world, how I am finding clarity and making meaning for myself in my own life. And then coincidentally, it has ended up in a book. So it is not so much that I found it important to, explore the theme, as that it is a theme that has been in my life that I have had to explore in order to move forward.
Okay. So let's start with grief. In the story, Where Does Kulu Go?, we explore anticipatory grief. And we learn in a later story that Kulu finally leaves us for good as he goes to the afterlife. How did you navigate writing about a loss that must be so collective? Kulu will naturally have multi-level, high-impact stakeholders in your family at all levels. And his loss is still reverberating in that family even today. How do you balance the collective story and your own story? Because in the book, it's very much your own story, but there has to be a process of reading the room, right?
Yeah, but I think you can only write what you know. You can only tell your story, and it would be presumptuous of me to assume or imagine what everyone else's story around the same situation might be unless they've told me, which, will happen in a family where there's an exchange of feelings and viewpoints about a family crisis. So I think particularly with this story, I tried hard to stay in my lane so that I would not be presumptuous about what others were going through.
Okay, so did you have to go through a process of sort of like an announcement? I'm going to write a book. Some of you will be in it. I'm going to write about something that hurt us all, and we all went through. Do you want to look at it? Is it going to be okay? Or were you just like, this is my story. We'll see the rest at the end?
Now that you mention it, Selena, that might have been a good idea. Had I had your wisdom at the time of writing, I might actually have done this very important exercise, but no, I did not. I simply wrote a number of stories, some of which were very personal, about my experiences as a human in the world, and put them together and put them out in the world. I did, though, have a lot of preparation, if you like, with the first story, which was about my husband, because of how it starts, because I was concerned that people might misunderstand it, even after reading the whole story, which they shouldn't. And I wanted to make sure that he would be okay with it. Yeah, so that I think has been the only time where I have kind of sought permission to tell my story, because it was so very much his story, really. It really, it was his story. And I was just relating my experience of his story. Yeah.
So it's quite interesting how the power of storytelling comes to the fore in navigating these issues around different types of loss, because bereavement therapists will tell you, and as you and I both know from Island Hospice, they'll tell you that it's actually in the storytelling, in the you put your memory, I share my memory, that we begin to move forward into the new normal in the loss. But it can sometimes go horribly wrong. Reflecting back on your experience, what tips could you give to a budding writer about writing about loss, particularly in the non-fiction space?
Wow, Selena, I don't feel like I have completed the journey, and the reverberations of what I've written, many of them are yet to unfold. And where you say it could go horribly wrong, it really might still go horribly wrong, and we don't know about it. So I unfortunately have no advice for anyone writing about grief, because I don't know the consequences.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. Now moving on to depression. So in the lump, we see one of the most vivid examples or pictures of depression. So the coming and going of it. Also the unique pairing of how compulsive it can be, yet also very indifferent. There's an indifference in the experience and almost a disassociation in the experience. But all in all, the exhaustion of that whole spiral and process. do you think we as Africans or African collective societies understand and get depression?
You know, you're asking me questions that I'm not qualified to answer because I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a sociologist. All I am is a storyteller telling the stories of what I am seeing and experiencing. I think African traditional society had a lot of safeguards for a lot of things. I think it was arranged in such a way, in its communality, there were a lot of opportunities for safety, growth, sharing, and all those good things. And I think as it has become infiltrated, distorted, disbanded, disjointed, a lot of those safeguards, safe spaces, mechanisms for growth and healing have changed or gone away. So it's very difficult to comment on African society as it is now because it's so higgledy-piggledy. It's not like anything I think that it was designed to be.
But it is. It very much.
It is what it is.
Yes, it very much is. It's very much what it has become is what it is.
Yeah.
And though you may not be an anthropologist, having been a journalist and through your column being almost a social commentator and now being a published author, it does qualify you to speak on society, because what do we as writers do but just tell what we observe or show what we observe? And that in itself is quite powerful because writers are doing it in a way that the rest of us are not capable, because when a writer does it, the whole of society or most people in society can connect to it. Did you have a motivation in terms of the storytelling around depression, in terms of even just wanting people to understand it better so that we could start to come to a place where we could reclaim safe spaces or remake safe spaces for those of us who are suffering from this issue or disease?
I didn't have a motivation except to observe and maintain my own emotional hygiene.
Wow. Explain that to us, Thembe.
That's all I was doing. I was doing the equivalent of brushing my teeth, flossing, gargling, washing my face.
But it was your emotions
Yes.
that were being flossed and
Yes.
cleaned.
And I think that that kind of emotional hygiene is something you need to do regularly to maintain emotional health. And part of my emotional hygiene is to write my feelings, put them on paper, explore them, read them later to understand what that was. And then thinking, this could be useful to someone else, maybe. But certainly that was not the initial motivation at all. Yeah.
Very, very powerful. Very powerful, because I don't think we get, I'm putting out my opinion there, I don't think we get emotional hygiene, what that even is, because to even begin to unpack that, we must then own and face a reality where emotions are not hygienic. And I always think of, when you get a wound or you get a pimple and it gets pussy, which shows that there's been an infection, right? And depending on the depth of that wound, if you let that pus burst all over in an unhygienic environment, you create more problems. And really, that's what it's like with our emotions sometimes, when
much so.
they, especially when we are at the edge of reason. in the
Yeah.
tunnel,
Yeah.
in the dark hole.
Yeah.
And, you know, fighting the war that is being waged on our souls, if we're not practicing some emotional
Yeah.
hygiene, it's like that pus, it spills over everywhere.
That's
And unintended consequences
such
arise.
a great analogy, Selena. And I would go even further to say, when that pimple bursts in public, when we are now taking our wounds into, for example, social media and bleeding in the street and spraying everyone now with our infection, then we just expand and exacerbate the problem. Whereas if we are maintaining regular emotional hygiene, we can work on our wounds and we can heal and then tell our story to help someone else, because we've created a pathway to light from darkness instead of just going out there and sharing our darkness.
It's quite interesting you mentioned social media, because sometimes I find social media is the most unhygienic place emotionally to be.
Yeah.
And definitely there are a lot of factors around that, primarily being the way some of those algorithms are set up on the different platforms. And their job is to keep people engaged, to keep people there. And like we were mentioning in another conversation, bad news sells, the negative is always easier to amplify, it travels faster. You know, it's almost very difficult to imagine social media being a place where you could plant anything that would bring forth light. But maybe it depends on usage.
Absolutely. And I think it would be unfair to say it is completely, a place of negativity, because we do see a lot of really good people putting out a lot of light. Teachers of meditation, psychologists, therapists, all bringing their science and art to social media, and helping to interrupt the flow of bad news.
Yeah. Despite how sometimes some people will doggedly get into their comments and continue to
This is
to
true.
burst their pimples and pussy wounds.
Yeah.
Another story, packing. We see a contrasting experience of the same disease, depression. But here, really what comes out, there's the metaphor of the box. And packing involves a lot more that we might not ourselves as society be able to unpack, because in it we see self-harm in the form of cutting. And the story is huge. There's a lot in the box, and I'm only talking about one thing in the box. But in terms of self-harm and cutting, American Psychological Association tells us that 17% of teenagers will cut themselves once in their lifetimes, or another act of self-harm, and the prevalence begin as early as 12 or 14, and it can continue, particularly for girls who do this, until their 30s or 40s. Cutting and self-harm doesn't always equate to an outcome of suicide, and actually in a lot of the cases it doesn't. But cutting is something that's very difficult for many people to understand. And you in the book you describe it as a route to a relief. In fact, the word you used was marvelous. A marvelous release to the pain of depression in particular. What are we missing with the cutting?
I think cutting is like other unhealthy outlets. Some people feel the relief of numbness when they abuse substances, for example, or engage in other behaviors that are unhealthy, but give a temporary relief. And so I put all of that in the same category because it's a way of coping with pain that gives you immediate but temporary relief. And you find that you have to keep doing it to get more relief, and maybe you have to keep doing it more and more and more, which is how people get addicted to drugs. And I think it's an indication of being in a place where you don't have healthy tools and ways to cope with the pain that you're feeling. We were talking earlier about African traditional society. And I think, for example, when you are, that whole thing about sitting around the fire telling stories, as much as, storytelling is so powerful because it serves so many functions. And as much as you think, okay, we sat around the fire, Gogo told us a story, this is the lesson from the story. But inside that story, there are multiple layers of meaning and things you can extract and draw. And so there is for example, a tool or opportunity that is now taken away. You would have maybe relationships with your father's sister that were designed to be very close. And she would be the person that you would tell all your big news to. And she acts as a buffer between the authority of your parents and the accessibility of your friends. So she's an adult person. She has authority. She can advise you, and she understands the values of your parents. So again, a lot of those relationships have disappeared or been disbanded or distorted. So many tools and safeguards that should be in place or were in place in our traditional communities that are no longer there or no longer available. And so we start to seek out these unhealthy ways of coping because we don't know what else to do.
So I know you're not a therapist and I know you're not a psychologist, but because you wrote so intimately about it and these stories are coming from a personal place, we are seeing those numbers. I mean, that was an American statistic. It's just that we don't have African statistics, but we've got a lot of anecdotal evidence that this phenomenon it's not a white thing. It's not a TV thing. It's a wholesale across, an anomaly across teenagehood, for mothers in particular, faced with a daughter who comes and confesses and says, I'm in a hole, I'm cutting myself, this is what I'm doing. What light could we give them in that situation?
I would definitely go for professional help. I wouldn't attempt to resolve something like that, just as a mum, because it's so complicated and, can go any one of several ways. Yeah. I think, again, getting professional help for me is like going to the doctor. If you have a backache or a tummy ache, no one shames you because you went to the doctor. And I think we need to start taking mental and emotional health the same way. Seek professional help and then follow what the professionals say you should do.
And possibly brace yourself for the long haul.
Possibly.
Yeah, because it's not going to be an injection and it's over.
This is true.
Yeah. A reviewer and blogger, Rutendo Chichaya from Rehab and Relapse, writes this about your story, Harare circa 2007, which you ended with the World Health Organization mental health stat about, the prevalence of many people beginning to suffer from this. And she says, Harare circa 2007 might as well have been a story about life in 2023. I'll add, maybe even parts of 2024.
Uh-oh.
Often, we are afraid and ashamed to tell the stories that reveal our wounds, but it is crucial to record history, offer each other new perspectives, help each other heal, and come up with solutions. 2023 definitely felt like a hard time on repeat for many Zimbabweans. Much of what you described in 2007, like the oscillating from I must be grateful to okay, I've counted my blessings, but can we also talk about the other side of these blessings? And many succumbed mentally to so many different things. Suicide numbers are on the rise like we've never seen them before. Depression, and so much more. Is it that, like Rutendo is saying or inferring, we are not talking enough about our wounds, or we're piling up so many wounds? Because if you think about that story, it's like a little bit like when you start talking about the okay, but whilst I'm being grateful for this and this and this and this and all of those things that are not as they should be are wounds piled on top of other wounds. So we don't even know where to start.
I'm not sure. I do think what you focus on expands. So I think if we focus on our wounds, they will expand. I do think if we focus on gratitude, we will have more to be grateful for. I appreciate that there is a lot of value, obviously, in telling our stories. But I think there's also a danger of you slip and you fall in mud, and then you kind of settle into it, you know? And then it starts to feel like home. And then, and there's this buildup of a comfort zone. It happens with grief. It happens with self-pity. It happens with anger. And I think that's very, very dangerous. So we have to be careful that our storytelling isn't part of a process of building and reinforcing those walls and those environments that will in fact lock us in to a space and a state that is not where we want to be. And I guess like all good things, it can become problematic if it's not watched.
Definitely. But I mean, it's when you're inside the hole, when the pain is demanding to be felt, right? Isn't that the most difficult time to watch it? And because you're inside it.
It is. And like friendship or debt, the time to build friendship is when you don't need it. Because so that it's available when you do. Right? The time to make friends is not when you want to borrow money. You want to make friends when you don't need money, so that when you do, they have it available for you. So I think it's the same with resilience and practices of mental health. You've got to take responsibility for that health and create systems around yourself. And a system can look like exercise, it can look like journaling, it can look like, whatever it is that works for you, but make it so that it's a part of your life that is there when you don't need it. So that when you do, the internal tools are there for you. Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting. Friends before you need the money, friends before you need the friendship, and resilience before you get into the dark place.
Because once you're in the dark place, it's dark.
It's very, very dark.
Yeah, and you can't see the light. So you've got to find the light inside you.
It does, and maybe this is it's this is where the conversation is almost bigger than both of us because it is so complex. Because some people don't have the tools, like
Yes.
to return from the darkness. Some
Yes.
people need to be taken away to go and be with tools and systems that are much bigger
Yeah.
than what they have capacity to do, and need to be able to enter into that without shame, without
That's true.
stigma, without
Absolutely.
condemnation, and with every sense of worthiness.
That's true. That's true. But I think it is like any other form of health. So you want to avoid getting to the stage where you have to be taken away. And the things that you do with your physical health are eat better, sleep better, exercise, make better choices generally, and try to make those into habits, a lifestyle of, which I think if we can start being proactive in the same way with our emotional health, maybe we can create a groundswell of better mental and emotional health so that we never have to be taken away. Yeah.
But sometimes I think to take the conversation to a different turn, what happens is not so much that we get taken away, because if we look at the healthcare system, there are challenges there. I mean, not all of us who suffer can be taken away. But there tends to be a suffering in silence in some extreme cases that then creates a generational wound. And I don't know if this was your intent, but definitely what I read into the piece, Let Us Pray, which is not so much about mental health at all, was that this almost read like a piece about a generation of mothers who came into from girl to woman, woman to mother in a time of war and in a time of great uncertainty and great sort of, we don't know what's going on. And from that perspective, to see what they accomplished is actually really quite incredible and worthy of a lot of celebration. But I think in the story, Let Us Pray, if we were to hear the emotions of the mother praying the prayer you describe, there's so much fear there.
Yes, 100%.
And the fear is so big, it's overshadowing all the best intentions of where that fear is actually coming from. Because the fear is actually coming from the desire to protect, but feeling like that power and capacity to protect is completely unattainable.
True.
Was this story for you about trauma associated with that generation of women? Is that what you were also speaking to there? Or was it, this was, like you said about the other pieces, it's from the journal. This is, it's your story.
It is from the journal, but from my many experiences and conversations with women of my generation, I am aware that it is a widespread concern. And I think the generation before us, as you've just described, did come at parenting, particularly girls, with a lot of fear, especially with new and uncharted waters and risks like HIV and that whole AIDS pandemic. And then we have the internet and social media, things that they really felt ill-equipped to equip their children for. And so they were afraid and acted accordingly.
And yeah, so one of the tools was definitely prayer.
Yes. Yes,
One of the
indeed.
tools was prayer.
Yeah.
Okay, we're winding down the episode, and I just want to ask you one last question. Across the board, like I mentioned in an earlier episode, rich feast of characters you served up in the 22 stories and essays. But this panorama of people that unfold from story to story, there are some, because what you do so perfectly well is what every writer desires to do, which is show and not tell. So there's not a point in which you told us, right?
Thank you, Selena.
Which is why I was able to make a meal out of this book. But it's shown so very well in the display and the showing of all these different characters. We get some weird and wonderful people. And they are displaying all kinds of unhealthy behaviors, triggers, reactions, cries for help. We don't know enough about them to be like, oh, that's schizophrenia, that's this fetish, but definitely the top notes are there that all is not well.
Yes,
right?
in the land.
So was this on purpose to indicate that we're all a little unwell? Are you highlighting that many of us remain undiagnosed because this topic is something we just generally misunderstand or speak in silence? What was so interesting, because it couldn't have just been for dramatic effect. What's the story there?
It's about being human and being flawed and being messy, but also about keeping on, getting on with life and stumbling and falling sometimes and getting up again. And sometimes it taking longer to get up than others, because that's what I see when I see humans. I think we're so wonderful and so flawed. And it's almost funny how we try to present as if we're not, as if we're not flawed, and also as if we're not wonderful. And that is the excitement for me.
I mean, it's magical that you can see it that way. It's probably more honest than most of us, because we do fall into the trap of it's either got to be wonderful or it's flawed, and damn it to hell, literally, that it's that flawed, because it's very difficult to embrace an imperfection, to embrace a flaw that is uncomely.
And still feel fabulous.
Yes, very, very difficult to do that,
It is.
and to see beauty or wonder in that at all. Just quickly before we go to your reading, what's next after Words and Weapons? How soon is the novel coming out?
Oh, my word. I wish it could be tomorrow. But I am enjoying writing a novel, which also I started 10 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. And when you say that and people go, wow, it's like they think you are sitting up every night writing epically. No, that's not what's happening. I'm writing maybe for 3 days at a time and then putting it away for 5 months. And that's how it comes to 10 years.
Yeah.
Not because I am so, I have so much to say and am refining my craft at all. Yeah, so I am really looking forward to completing my novel. I hope it will be soon. I am also this year, I have just written something that took all the wind out of me for film. It is not yet a screenplay, but it will be very soon. And I'm really hoping to get that produced and hopefully on our screens, within the next 12 months. I think of myself as an idea generating factory, which often has to be shut down for maintenance because I have lots and lots of ideas, and I just need to figure out where to put them all, how to arrange them, what to do with them. But definitely you can expect a short film and the novel in the next.
We're looking forward to that, Thembe. We really are.
Me too.
I love the way she says me too. So, Thembe, we always end every episode with a reading from the author. I know you got a short piece prepared for us on our theme for this episode, which was the woman and her struggle for the whole mind. Please read it for us.
Well, as we spent quite a bit of time discussing lump, I thought for those who haven't read it, this would be a good opportunity. Lump. The lump was growing because generally, if left unattended, that is what lumps do. It started to expand and to force water from her eyes when she wasn't looking. I mean, she'd be minding her own business and the water would come. It made her wonder if the lump was made of water, salt water, like the water in her eyes. It made her feel all quiet on the inside to think about that lump. It was a deep, seeping silence, a silence against words that felt like a silence against oxygen, a silence so she couldn't breathe because of the lump. But that didn't stop the water from coming. She hated the inconvenience of it. She hated that her son could walk in at any time and ask about the water pouring from her eyes. Mommy, why are you crying? No, I'm not crying, Nana. But Mommy, you have tears in your eyes and your cheeks are all wet. No, Nana, it's just the wind / smoke / book / sun I'm reading. She was becoming more and more ingenious at explaining the water. Meanwhile, the lump was growing. From time to time, she was thinking about it deliberately, trying to figure out what that lump was about. Other times, she was just telling herself that she'd learned to live with it, even to forget it. Then she tried yoga, and they asked her, "What are you grieving?" And she ran out of class and never went back, ran all the way to her car and even left her shoes behind. She keeps telling herself that one day she'll go back. She'll go back to pick up her shoes. But really, she will be going back because of the lump. But she knows she will not go back because they'll find the lump she never told them about, and they'll expose it, and then the water in her eyes will be too much, and then she will drown and die from the salt water in her eyes and the lump in her throat, and the pain in her chest, and the rip in her blouse, and the crack in her heart, and the wound in her soul, and the life in her years, and the man in her bed, and the child in her arms, and the duty, and the whole damn thing. And she does not want to die. She wants to live. I mean, sometimes I'm just there, minding my own business, and the water will come. I mean, sometimes I wonder if the lump is made of water, salt water, like the water in my eyes. I mean, because the lump, I think it's choking me. I think the oxygen is going now. I think I want to die because the lump.
Thank you, Thembe. Well, it's been another great edition of the book club as we've talked to Thembe Khumalo. See you again next week, same time, as we celebrate another fabulous African female author. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and stay true. Goodbye. This episode was brought to you in partnership with Econet Wireless Zimbabwe.